I'm here to Oxford's obviously talk on a sense of wonder. My name is Costa. I currently am an assistant head teacher in a school in Dubai called Jumeirah English Speaking School. I've been involved with the IB for quite a number of years in many different capacities. I work very closely with the IB coordinators group in the UAE, in the United Arab Emirates. I've worked with Oxford University Press on two of their publications, the Theory of Knowledge Skills and Practice booklet and the extended essay course companion that you probably find downstairs. So let's just say I have blue blood, IB blood in me. I very much believe in this program, and part of this presentation is obviously a tribute to the IB, because I literally joined an IB school specifically to start teaching the theory of knowledge, and then what attracted me even further was obviously taking on extended essays and that opportunity that it gave students. There's a couple of lessons I've learned along the way, and I want to share some of those experiences with you today. So I'm just going to start with what the actual topic of the presentation is, and it's effectively this, a sense of wonder and the idea of restoring a sense of curiosity and inquisitiveness back into the classroom setting. I'm going to start with how I kind of went through this journey and where it all started, really. But it all starts with when you're in the primary years program, what you find is when you're very young, you find that learning is a full-bodied experience. Kids are moving around all the time. They don't sit down, they don't settle very easily, and they like to, grab onto things. There's a communion with solidity. They like to bite things and lick things and put things in their mouth. It's a full-bodied experience you find when you're very young. And then the other thing, amazing thing that the students do at a very young age is they ask you lots of questions. They're endless question machines you find. Why is the sky blue? Why is the grass green? My favorite question, how do helicopters work? I asked my father this question. He never gave me a satisfactory answer. But, it made me curious about things, because it was like, well, I need to find out. How do I find out? And this was before, obviously, Google and Wikipedia existed, so it was a little bit more challenging, but, local libraries. But, there was that sense of adventure and curiosity about the world. As you move through education, you find, and I think education is partly to blame, and I don't mean education in an abstract sense. Education is great, but I mean education the way it's designed, the way it's structured, the way schools sort of articulate the concept of educating young people. And you find that as you go through, middle years program, that middle trajectory of education, you find it becomes kind of a waist-up experience. And it's very easy to see why. Look how classrooms are laid out. If you Google classroom, you will find that. Literally every image on Google is effectively a bunch of tables and a bunch of chairs. And so the idea is that education now, as you're growing older, is a waist-up experience. It's not a full-bodied experience anymore. You don't need to move around. Just sit there, okay? And I'm going to somehow, disseminate information from the front. And there's a reason we do this, and it's really the end point. It's the goalpost that we've set at the end of the journey, that educational journey, as it were. As you move into sort of DP level, or the senior years, your last 2 years of education, it's not even a waist-up experience anymore. It very much is a neck-up experience. Everything happens up here in the head. And that's really the way education is currently structured. And the reason for it, as I said, is about goalposts. And the goalposts are really exams. We want the students to be able to perform at this endpoint, whatever those are, and those are exams. We want them to be able to have the content knowledge and possibly the skills as well to be able to excel in an examination at the end. But often you find that because the educational trajectory is on this pathway, it has a very deadening impact on learning. It's not just about us being able to just pass on information to students and expect them to sort of hold on to that and then regurgitate it in an exam. Along the way, something is sacrificed. And I think the greatest sacrifice, on the altar of education is this idea of inquisitiveness and curiosity. Those questions, what happened to those questions that students asked, when they're very little? What happened to all those millions of questions? When you give them a new piece of content, I'm going to talk to you guys today about the Cold War, or today we're going to learn about cell division. When you introduce them to new ideas, they just wait. They wait for you to deliver the answers. They're waiting for you to tell them the truth. And that's what happens to students as they get older, and I experience this on a daily basis, and I'm sure you have as well. Gone is that, sir, can I ask a question, can I ask a question? Or getting up out of their seat and going, oh, I need to see that, what is that? Oh, I'm going to manipulate that and see what happens. Gone is that adventure. Actually, the only places where it still occurs, and this is a problem, slightly, is in tabloid media or in the kind of social media. Students are very inquisitive about this kind of stuff. And it's because of the way it's articulated, what's happening to Khloe Kardashian? Oh, what's happening? What's happening to Khloe? They start asking questions, or what is Gangnam Style? Got to find out what that is. It's trending. It's very interesting right now. And so suddenly the issue is that obviously that what they're focusing their kind of inquisitiveness on and their curiosity are things that really are quite shallow if we have to sort of look at them in the kind of a long trajectory. They're quite shallow, and obviously, it's what sets that brain rot in, I guess, is what I'm getting at. So here are some propositions, and I have 3 to make with regards to how to kind of reinvigorate that sense of inquisitiveness back into our students. And I call them T's. You can call them whatever you want, phases, options. But T1 is this very IB thing called reflecting. And I'm going to get to it in a minute, but reflecting is very important. Now, the traditional model of education is it's outcomes driven. It's very much about you drill tasks, you correct those tasks, and then you pass an exam. That's effectively how education is currently. So that's how we go about reflecting. We basically drill their tasks, we correct their assessments, examinations, and then they hopefully will pass that exam. So what I would propose is we need to invert that model. And that is because when they leave our sphere, when they leave high school as such, they go to university and then they're presented with questions like this or issues like this. You know what? It's time for you to write your thesis now. What do you need to do a thesis? You need to come up with your own question. I need to do what? I need to come up with my own question. This is a struggle. Often you find, this is the student experience. I need to come up with my own question. Oh my God, this is horrifying. So what I propose is the first thing is we need to reflect not on those exam points, but on different kinds of questions. And I mean, I didn't invent these questions; these are quite straightforward. But when we're talking about what students are doing, instead of asking correcting the task, we might ask them, how did you answer that? What process did you go about using to answer that question? Get them to think about actually the journey to the answer that they obviously put on paper. Another one is, why was that wrong? Instead of telling them what was wrong, why was that wrong? Oh, I don't know, sir. Okay, we can start with other questions. You can break it down and unpack it for them until they can start seeing it for themselves. What can we do to get it right then? Set their own targets. Help them, of course, move away from the idea of a dependence on you to tell them everything, to show them the way, to point to the right answer, and that expectation that obviously the students have time and time again. So what my first proposition is, instead of teaching to the test, I think we should be teaching to learn from the test, is what my first kind of recommendation would be. So the second tier, a little bit more exciting, I guess, is how do we get people to be curious about the world around them? So I did an experiment, it turns out, with a bunch of Year 7 students. And it had to do with sort of trying to see what kinds of questions they would come up with. But I didn't actually tell them that they needed to come up with questions. I just said to a bunch of Year 7 students, these are 10, 11-year-olds, I said to them, I'm going to show you a clip. It's about 40 seconds long. And I want you to just write down any thoughts that come into your brain. And this is a kind of a planar reactivity that I did at the end of a lesson. And this is the video I showed them, and I'll show you now.
A near miraculous escape. The lucky survivors.
So that was obviously a small excerpt from one of the most magnificent documentaries ever made. Full credit to Richard Attenborough, of course, and the BBC Planet Earth series. I mean, it is spectacular. The greatest action sequence ever filmed, really. Now, I showed them that. And as I said to you at the beginning, I just said to them, just write down any thoughts that you have about this short clip that I'm going to show you. And this is what my Year 7s came up with. So they started with, why do lizards lay their eggs in dangerous places? How does a snake eat a lizard? Why didn't the cameraman help the lizard? How did they film that? Why is nature cruel? Now, this is really what I was trying to get out of the students. I was aiming for kind of this one here and that one there. Ideally, I wanted the students to be able to start talking about ethics, because we were in a class of social studies, and the idea is we were exploring issues of ethics, but I hadn't told them we're doing ethics. I hadn't prescribed, and I hadn't sat at the front of the classroom and said, today we're going to learn about ethics, and ethics are A, B, C, and D. Please write that down. You're going to need that in your test. I started with this, and the idea was to just catch them, to get them fascinated again with, the joy of learning. And I'm sure, even when you're watching that too, you're thinking, oh, this is quite exciting. What's happening? Oh, what's going to happen next? And suddenly I had them. It was the hook. I had them curious about stuff that's happening outside in real time. And so they started asking all these questions, and it started a conversation. And we started looking at all sorts of things. I mean, we went for all of them. Things I couldn't answer, I said, go and find out. And then when you come back, you can tell the whole rest of the class what you found. Suddenly they were out there exploring the world and trying to find out things about, science. Why do lizards lay their eggs in very dangerous places? And then things like, this is obviously a biological question, but really when we started talking about these, it created a nice, interesting discussion about ethics. Then I did the same with pre-IB diploma students, and this is what they came up with. Oh, that was one of my Year 7 students, by the way. Why are you showing this? It's horrible. So my Year 11s came up with this. This is a staggering difference. It's a staggering difference, and I blame education for this, to be quite honest. These are the students that sit there and wait for the answers to be delivered to them. I don't know, sir. What do you want me to say? This is the student that has been trained out of inquiring and asking questions. This is the student that is not curious anymore about knowledge. This is a student that has been served the wrong end of the education stick, where the answers will be delivered to you in a revision pack at the end of the year, and all you need to do is regurgitate them in that exam. So they don't want to answer because they're going to get it wrong. They just want to know what you think, and then they will repeat it to you in parrot-like fashion. And that's the problem. And I did this experiment last year with the students, and it is a staggering difference. Something happens along the way, and I believe it's the way we currently educate. So part of my suggestions is the second suggestion, I should say, is about jump-starting their brain. And you saw a little example there about how to sort of get them hooked. And it's all about little hooks. One of the other things I do a lot of crazy things. I carry a wooden spoon around. It's a pretty large wooden spoon from IKEA, and I wrote my name on it, Mr. Costa, and I carry it around with me everywhere I go. Literally, it's in my pocket, I'm flipping it around in my hand. I'll go to assemblies with it, I'll go to parent-teacher sessions with it. It's my thing, it's my trademark. And every student will ask me, why do you carry a spoon, Mr. Costa? And my answer to that is very simple, it's always the same. That's a good question. And that's all I will ever say to them. It's just a good question. Because I want them to I don't want to tell them what it is, I want them to start thinking. And they come up with their own ideas. The best one I've ever heard is, it's like Thor's hammer. Only better. But yeah, I want them to start thinking about different possibilities. Why does he hold that thing? Eventually I tell them, I give them a hint, I say, it's a metaphor. And it is a metaphor for how education works, really. Metaphor is, we either do one of two things in education, don't we? The most obvious is we spoon feed. Here is the answer. Or we stir. I prefer the stirring part. I like to stir. And again, if you want to see this exact Year 7 to Year 11 model in action, parents will ask me this. I stand on gate duty sometimes, watch the cars go by, say, no, you're not allowed in. And while I'm there, parents will walk in and they'll say to me, why do you carry a spoon around? That's an interesting question. No, seriously, why do you carry a spoon around? Well, it's a metaphor. No, you need to tell me what the metaphor is. They want the answer. They just want it now and they want it immediately. There's none of that idea of, well, what's the journey to learning? Where's that idea of actually spending some time figuring it out and thinking? It's no, I need it immediately. You've got to give it to me in a tweet. Okay, it's got to be bite-sized and immediate so that I can obviously understand and move on with my life. And I find this is the problem. So jumpstarting their brain, and I would recommend all sorts of things. You know, starters, plenaries. You don't need to teach the content. I mean, there's an obsession with content. I need to get through the content. I have no enough time to do the content. Well, you can be imaginative with the content. You know, if I'm teaching Cold War, for example, as a history teacher, I will throw up a scenario with them and I'll say, this is the scenario that Europe found itself in. What would you do? And I unleash the students on that question and let the students go and figure out what would they do given the scenario I gave them. So I'm not actually telling them what actually happened initially, I'm just providing them with the context. And I want them to then think about, well, what could we possibly do? And then you come up with all of these amazing ideas. Oh, I would have done this, or I would have lobbied that person, or I would have declared war. War is very popular. You know, I would have killed him, whatever it is. They come up with all these amazing scenarios, and then you've got them hooked. And then I tell them, do you want me to tell you now what happened? They're like, yeah, tell us what happened. Because you've started with, again, engaging their curiosity rather than just delivering the content. And so this is tier 3, my final sort of recommendation as such, and it's got to do with questioning. Really, again, not something that's new and innovative. I'm not coming up with anything grandiose, but I believe theory of knowledge in the IB is well placed for this. I teach theory of knowledge. I love the theory of knowledge, and I found along the way the most important question to ever ask a student is this one: how do we know that? And this is a question we don't ask because we're obsessed with the idea of the answer part. What is the answer, rather than how do we know that? And so I'll give them 3 scenarios. Again, I'm a history teacher, so I'll focus on these. And I'll just show you 3 scenarios I give the students. I will show them this work of art when I'm teaching things like the Cold War. It's got nothing to do with the Cold War. It's a Minoan fresco. I show this to the students at the beginning of a lesson, and I say, all right, here is the scenario. This is a reconstruction by an artist called Guillermo. And he basically used these fragments here. If you look closely, they're just a bunch of fragments. And then he reconstructed the rest from those fragments. What questions does this raise about history? I will ask the students. Or I show them this. This is a very famous, obviously, the Bayeux Tapestry. Apparently, it shows us where King Harold Godwinson dies. It says Harold the King, obviously, is killed here. And there's a couple of interpretations here. It's either that this is Harold and he took an arrow to the eye. Very popular story, that one. Or that one's Harold and he's being lopped down by a Norman soldier. Or both of them are Harold. It happened in sequence. Poor guy took an arrow to the eye, then got mowed down by a Norman cavalry officer. Really unfortunate series of events for that guy. So there's 3 options. And again, I'll ask the students, what does this tell us about history, for example? Or this one. I'll show them this work. It was purchased, this is the Kouros, purchased by the Getty Museum in LA. And the Getty Museum paid a nice royal sum of $9 million for this sculpture. But then, and they paid this basically, obviously, just to be clear about this, they did an investigation, obviously, before they spent that money, and they basically asked a group of scientists, geologists, to test it. So they tested obviously the marble, and they found that basically there's something about the dolomitization or the calcification of the marble. The only way it would have obviously been at that particular point that it was is over a period of thousands of years. Therefore, it is genuine. But then immediately before it was being previewed or shown to the public, there was a preview for some art experts, art historians, and the minute it was unveiled, they had an intuitive repulsion to it. They took one look at it and they said, fake. There's no way that is an original. And for whatever reasons it was, their hunch, their background experiences, they just couldn't accept that this was genuine. And now if you check the Getty website, or if you go to the Getty Museum in LA, if you have that opportunity, you will find this is the listing for it. And it says, Greece, place of creation, ? And underneath it says date, about 530 BC, or modern forgery. It's the whole thing. There's the problem. It looks too good, apparently, art historians said. There's no way, they said, if you ever go to an archaeological dig, you will believe that is genuine. But the Getty sticks to now. It's got a problem here where the scientists are saying, well, it seems to be genuine, and then you've got the art historian saying, no, it's a fake. So they are undecided on the matter themselves. So I asked the students the same thing here. What is more reliable here? Interesting question to explore. And so these 3, this is a TOC approach to knowledge in different subject areas. You can look at things like, if I look at the Minoan girls, I say, can we ever know the past for certain? Just by looking at how it's obviously reconstructed. If knowledge is fragmentary, what is history then? Is it like filling in gaps? Can we ever know the past with any great deal of certainty? Whereas students will read a book and say, well, that's the answer, sir. This is what happened. And I'm like, well, that's one possibility. How was that knowledge constructed is a much better question to ask the students, to get them thinking about what are the implications then on other knowledge that you're using to base that on. Or truth, the matter of truth. What role does emotion play when it comes to writing history, for instance? Because we prefer the arrow in the eye story because it's more exciting. And it's important to know that. Why do people prefer that? Or the Trojan horse story. We prefer the Trojan horse story to an earthquake leveling the city of Troy. Trojan horse story sounds more exciting. Or obviously the $9 million question. Is science more reliable than your intuition? Because some people would say, you know, well, whatever the science is saying, that's it. That's the truth. Can't rely on this intuition stuff, fluffy stuff. Now you can do this with all sorts of subjects. It's just about inverting the questions that you ask the students. And again, from that discussion, I can look at things in history, for instance. I will look at things like the reliability of sources, limitations of source material, all very useful skills to have when you're writing those examination papers. But I'm doing it through the idea of exciting them and making them curious about knowledge, making links to other things, not just here is the content, learn it like this. Biology. Why do we use diagrams? That's a question nobody asks. You just use them. They're just there. They're in a book. They're in the textbook. We use diagrams. But there's so many issues with diagrams, if you come to think of it. They're representations of reality. What is lost when you represent things? There are details that are lost. Are those details important? Are there variables? Is it capturing it? What is the value of it? Or if you're doing economics, how useful are patterns in terms of predicting future trends? Because we do that as well. Oh, there was a dip there. You know, that's predicting something there, it's going to be happening, and so on. So starting to look at, obviously, how knowledge is constructed rather than just the end product of, obviously, knowledge. Now, why would we do this? I'm going to end with this idea of value. Why should we bother? Well, I'm going to say the first thing that obviously is important about these questioning skills and curiosity with the world around us is it's a gullibility check. If you're not curious, if you're not actually scratching underneath, you know, the surface, you're highly likely to be quite gullible when it comes to, obviously, the world around us. So, you know, things like the most obvious things, you know, take these pills, you will lose weight. Oh, okay. There's a lot of questions that should be asked here. Or, you know, the opposite of that. Take this powder and you'll be muscly. Or my favorite, you know, it's fake. No, it's the truth. Oh, it might be the truth. Well, which one is it? There's a lot of questions that need to be asked here to be able to decipher through it. But really, the implications here, there's a political implication here, obviously, but the implications can be quite devastating. If students don't bother, or adults as we move forward, obviously, into adulthood, if we don't bother to sit there and ask those types of questions. But we need to be trained to ask those questions. We need education to go back onto that track of sort of having that culture of getting us to ask questions instead of waiting for the answers. You know, if the answer is at the end of a tweet, well, this is a problem. Because we will just accept it as the truth. And if it's repeated enough times, it is the truth, isn't it? The other thing is, the other value is that obviously these questioning skills, the inquiry-based approach, the kind of curiosity with learning is very important to the creative process. And I'll show you an example. I'll often show students this, and I will say to them, what do you see? A brick, sir. But every now and then, you get a student who will say, well, I see this. And this is where we want them to be. You know, the potential for this thing. Some people just see what it is, and others see its capacity to be something else. And I think this is the important part. This is what we want education to be able to do. Very known painting, obviously. The Sistine Chapel, obviously the creation of Adam, or the creation of man. Now, many people have written about this. Stacks of people have seen it. There's lots of pictures of it. And yet, somebody walked into the Sistine Chapel a few years ago, looked up at the same ceiling everybody else did, and asked a very different question. Said, is it possible this is representing something else altogether? He was a brain surgeon, a neuroscientist, and he saw the human brain in effectively the folds of God's here, God's panoply here with the angels, and he saw the human brain. Now this is deeply fascinating because it implies all sorts of interesting things. Either Michelangelo was being a bit heretical there and suggesting that the creation of all things is human, got away with it, metaphor, or he was suggesting that, you know, God is probably the seat of all wisdom as well, either or. But there seems to be something more in there, and somebody, again, looking at something everybody else has looked at and asked a very different question. It's an interesting thought, and I wanted to leave you with that. Thank you very much for attending this session.